A story about that if you want to hear it, but it was kind of a.
Yeah, because I've always never remember Grandpa is racist at all. So
Oh,
Me
he
either.
wasn't. He was just the opposite. He was a devout
Yeah.
Catholic and tried to live the way he
He
was the
did
head
live
of the
that
Usher
way.
Club, and as president, he nominated 3 black men, and the whites immediately they canceled their insurance policies. They made like hell. We would periodically get the nun on a PA in school saying, "We have a special prayer request. We want the whole school to pray for Mr. Al Zotter's prayer request." And I never knew what that was for.
God,
Everybody
was
would
it
look
for
at me,
his
"What's that for?"
safety?
Probably. But also at that same time, our mother was the head of the Rosary Altar Society, and she took the wives, the black wives of those people, in. So you had double trouble, and their children were in my classroom.
See, our parents were nigger lovers as far as the people
John
back then.
Anthony.
Back then, that's what
That's
they were
what
called.
you were
Well,
called.
that's
so
true.
this is important for the sake of history. That's not something you would say in 2022, but back in 1960, that is something that would be an acceptable
So
phrase.
as the neighborhood changed, for example, we had friends that were 3 doors down. It was a girl and a boy named Sonny and a boy named
Huron.
Huron.
Yep.
and we became friends with them. But she would call me the graham cracker, and I would call her soda cracker, and I would call her graham cracker, and we would have an Oreo, and I was the middle, and she was the dark outside, and the word nigger was used very freely with no intent whatsoever to be hurtful to anyone, and nobody ever took it that way.
But I think back at the time, a huge piece was more about who you were. They knew that in the same manner that black people could use that word with one another, you were allowed to use that word
True.
because they knew that you were a
They
safe
were welcome
space.
in our home. In fact, we had no grass. Do you remember grass on Virginia Park at all?
No, the tree killed
No,
them.
it was, and so that night they would go with a hose and they would water the dust down, but we were the whole neighborhood's playground. I mean,
Was it mainly black at that time or mainly white?
mixed.
So, every year, there's more black and less white.
Right.
Right.
And the people directly across the alley, we had an alley that separated, and the people across the alley were, it was a boy
The
and a girl,
Eliases,
the
the Eliases,
Eliases. And we played with them. We all played together. We didn't have a black, white, Jew,
But that
Catholic.
sounds like you and your family in less than the time because if it was
Our whole
becoming
block
more-
was like that, is what I'm saying.
I'm saying that that was your experience and that
Yes.
that it couldn't have been consistently like that because it was consistently becoming more black. And the reason it was becoming more black is that there were white
People were
leaving.
moving out,
It
right.
was white
The
flight.
Jewish people really flagged, I mean, they,
And white flight was happening because
the black people were moving in.
people were not comfortable with the lack
They
of
were fearful.
segregation.
It was called block busting. The first black in a block would immediately terrorize all the rights, and they would all put their homes for sale, and prices would drop.
Mhm.
And I think that
People were upset about that. They're,
we
you know,
might have been the last white family within about a 7-block radius when they finally
That
moved.
was the case in on Winthrop when
Yes.
they moved from
Yes.
Virginia Park to Winthrop, and that was before they moved next to us on Bramall. But they were the very last white family in the
Yes.
area. And if I remember correctly, the story is there was beginning to be so much crime in the area that a neighbor came up to them and said, "We've kept you safe.
It
as
was the
long
bank
as-
garden.
We've kept you safe as long as we can. You need to move now. You're
And
not going to
Dad-
have much more time."
Dad took it so seriously that the very next day there was a for sale sign in front of the house, and everything stopped. The break-in, the attempted break-in, more accurately, stopped all of it.
So what attempted break-in? I don't remember this part.
When Mom and Dad were asleep in bed, Mom, they had a back porch that, it was a
I
small
remember,
back porch.
yeah.
And Mom there was no air conditioning, so she used to leave the door open, but she'd have the chain on the top of the door, so it would only be open just a little tiny bit, although anybody could have broken in.
Maybe.
And she was a very light sleeper, and she woke up to see a black hand, leaning inside to undo the chain, and she took the door and she slammed it, and all she heard was a yelp, and the guy ran away. And the next day is when the guard at the bank said, "I can't hold them back." And the guard at the bank was a black man who idolized you. You were so tiny, and every time
I
you went,
remember him. He
would-
always gave me money
he
for
always
gum.
gave you money for gum, right?
Probably the reason I have root canals to this day.
To this day. And he saw me and he called me over and he said, I can't protect them anymore. And it'll stop if when you put it up for sale. And sure enough, it stopped just like that.
So interesting. Let's see. Describe the personalities. Well, let's see. Were there special items in the house that you remember? What is your earliest childhood memory? What is your earliest childhood memory?
Standing, and according to John, from my description of her, my mother's aunt, the one she called Mommy, was holding me on the landing of a flight of stairs. That must have been, I was crying. That must have been the day we were moving from Brooklyn to Virginia Park. But I don't have any memory of Mommy other than that one, if that was her. And that's my first memory.
And how old would you have been about?
Well, if that was 47, you'd have
2
been
years old.
Yeah. And what about you, Uncle John? What was your first memory?
back on Brooklyn, standing at the stairs. And as far as Mommy, I don't know where her house was, but it wasn't where we lived, I won't
No.
think. And I was sitting on the floor, and she was yelling at me because I was playing with the white roach powder along the floorboard.
Oh,
And she was telling me
God.
not to touch it, leave it
Wow.
alone. So I think,
Telling John not to touch it was like saying, go for it, go for
Right.
it.
All right, go ahead.
Let me get back to the karma about Dad and the sponsoring the Usher Club.
Yeah.
One of the ushers he sponsored ended up getting Carl a job at the water board where he worked his whole career and retired from.
Oh, wow.
And he wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And I got my job at Ford through another of the black men Dad sponsored. And when I should have been laid off permanently, he saw to it that I was transferred to another department. And I kept my seniority with Ford while I was, and didn't lose it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a job when I got out of the Army. In fact, I probably would have been killed in Vietnam if not for that.
And the third,
Wait, why do you say that you would have been killed
We-
in Vietnam?
When Hung and I got married in October of '67, I worked in Army intelligence. We knew the Viet
Right.
Cong were moving around the cities. We knew something was coming up. We didn't. But in October of '67, we left there. If not, I could have stayed there. I was offered jobs as a clerk typist. I could have made 5 times what I could have made in this country working for Ford. But they were not. It was only for like 6 month or year contract. You didn't know what was going to happen after that.
Right.
But I would have been if without a job at Ford, I would have stayed there definitely. And had that happened the following January, after October, the Viet Cong invaded, came right through her neighborhood. We would have been captured and killed on the spot probably. Her uncle, a policeman, was arrested, but he survived. Her sister got hit by shrapnel. She was okay. But yeah, well, if I'd been there, that would have been the end for us 3 months later. So having a job waiting at Ford, and I already had 4 years seniority at Ford that I was in the Army. And so I wanted to come back and keep that seniority. Although, well, yeah, that's a separate story. So,
and the
yeah.
third black man that was introduced and his wife was a judge, Judge Fred Bird.
Oh, Judge Fred Bird.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of stories about him. I mean, he never fixed parking tickets or anything, but he helped us out on more ways than one.
He fixed my speeding ticket,
I
but
didn't know
he
about
did.
that.
He didn't fix it the
But
way
he
you think.
didn't.
Like
Yeah,
he
was-
made me
he
go
was an
down to
up and
court
eye
and
guy.
sit there the whole day and listen every case. And at the end of the day, they never called me. I go. He says you can go home now.
Was
I
just-
didn't appreciate it. I was waiting to get called. Oh, I know this guy's gonna fix it up. You're gonna spend a day in court and learn what could happen to you if somebody don't take it. So that was beautiful lesson,
yeah.
beautiful object lesson.
Real up and up guy. What was describe the personalities of your family members. So describe the personality of Grandma. Mary
Non-judgmental, sweet, kind, loving. Everybody loved our mom, literally.
She
I
was
mean,
French. Yep.
She was a huggy, touchy,
Emotional.
emotional, really probably one of the best people I've ever known in my life.
When Grandma died at over 90, the church,
94.
I can't say was packed, but the church was full. And usually when you have someone die when they're older, you don't have a lot of people.
Because they've outlived their
They've
friends.
outlived their people. And people aren't going to drive across the state for someone who is 94,
They did
or they're not everyone's going to make sure that they're going to not, be at that mass because she's lived a good life. And that church was full. That church was full.
People used to call her all the time and ask her to pray for them because, quote, God will hear your prayers, Mary,
Direct
unquote.
line.
And that drove her crazy. God hears everyone's prayers. My prayers are no better than anyone else's. But people really saw in her a sainthood. Mom always said she wished to go to purgatory, not straight to heaven, because she wasn't worthy of heaven, which makes the rest of us look pretty bad.
No,
Because
the nuns loved our parents.
If there is a purgatory.
the nuns did love our
They
parents.
considered them living
Oh,
saints, and I
they
don't know how
did.
many times I got out of a scrape because
Yeah.
of their reputation.
And then I had to follow him in school, which was like, oh God, another Zotter. It was, thank you.
My nephew, a Vietnamese who knew Grandma for a few years before she died, just last year he said, next time you go to the cemetery, I'd like to go with you and say a prayer for Grandma.
Aww.
She
She made that
changed
much
lives.
impression
She
on
made so many friends and people that genuinely loved her. But then, as I pointed out to her, that's because they didn't live with her the way I did.
But we're all human,
Not true.
almost.
And then what about Grandpa? What was the personality
He
about
was a
him?
German.
Which meant there was no. He would never come and hug you. He was not affectionate. If you happened to catch him when Mom was doing dishes or something, and he was on his way down to the basement to his office, he would pat her behind or do a loving gesture with her. However, anything Mom wanted, she got. Mom wanted a second dog, Dad said.
Shaw,
No, we're-
we don't need that dog.
That was his phrase, Shaw. And he took the dog away to the pound, to the Humane Society, actually. And Mom just sat there and cried while he did it. And then he came back home with the dog and said, here, Toots. And she kept the dog. She always got her way. Dad always caved. It was so great.
And what was so like you're saying he wasn't very affectionate, which I'm sure was true of you growing up. He was affectionate with me because, as we
That's
all
different.
know, with grandkids, totally different
I know
ball
that
game
too.
than it is with your parents.
Absolutely, 100%.
What else? He was very devout, very much followed. Grandma always said that she was Catholic.
Didn't Mom convert? She wasn't. Did they practice
No.
Catholicism?
The Stoneyards were Catholic as far as I know.
No, they were Catholic, but the different, if I remember correctly, the difference was they were kind of Catholic with a little c. It was like
Yes, and Dad was Catholic with a capital C, and
he followed rules,
I like
where
it.
she was about love. She was more about
yeah.
doing what you were supposed to do.
Dad tended to preach his religion more. Mom tended to live her religion more.
And so Grandpa, I would say, was devout. He was strict. He was loving. He was non-demonstrative, hard worker.
What?
No, he seemed to be stricter with Carl than me, but I don't know why.
That was the firstborn.
Yeah, it could be Carl, because Carl was different.
Poor Carl.
I see him too as being, he liked to have fun. He liked to drink. He liked